Welcome to today's episode of Door Church Connect, our weekly connection or podcast where we talk about thinking and living biblically, experiencing wellness in every area of our lives. So before we get started and get any further into this, I want to introduce our guest. Just happens to be a genuine homeboy. Actually, one of the oldest in our congregation, Pastor Mike Webb. And so, Mike, we want to welcome you to Door Church Connect today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be back in Tucson. Great to be where it's warm. So thank you.
Yes. So before we get momentum, we need you to stop, and out of respect to your adopted country, we have the national anthem of Canada, which I can actually sing and quote, "Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, with glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North strong and free," etc., etc.
That's where you drop the hockey puck, right?
We do this for every visiting pastor from whatever nation they're from. But for me personally, actually, it's a little deeper and it's maybe a little more personal. And I like to think, Mike, that in part this has to do with my long-standing relationship with Canada and Canadians since from the time I was just a little kid. And I've played ice hockey where we started games singing "O Canada," followed by singing the national anthem. And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, today's episode is divinely scripted, since the 2021 NHL season started this week, this past Thursday night. And it would be very insensitive of me, Pastor Mike, if I didn't begin by at least giving you, as a Canadian representative, condolences to losing in the finals of the World Juniors tournament, which was out in Edmonton and Red Deer. And you lost, I'm not sure, to some team. I forget exactly who it was. It may come to me, though, before the episode is over. So enough friendly banter from me and friendly little digs that we give one another.
Well, I'm a dual citizen, so I can go either way.
You can, yeah.
So you did win the juniors championship.
We won. Yeah. Last year we became Canadian citizens, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
So we're official. I guess what people had said is that we were the longest standing missionaries in the fellowship. I don't know if now that we're citizens that we cease to be missionaries, but I guess we're natives. So I can sing about our home and native land now.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
congratulations, then.
Pastor Warner referred to you as a homeboy. Can you explain the connection that you and your family have to the Tucson church, where you grew up here in Tucson, high school, where you met your wife, what part of town she's from, and just how that all came together, how you got saved, how she got saved? What were the particulars in the story?
Well, interestingly, one of the people that I think maybe one of the first converts, if not the first converts, Gary. I worked with him at the Roundup restaurant, so he got saved and got inspired. So he would drive across Tucson. This would have been in 1974, probably about 6 months after the church started. And he would drive over to my house and come to tell me.
6 months.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I must have been by then incredibly mature in my ministry style and discipline and practice. It's actually, to be honest, it's frightening.
Well, the one thing he did tell me, he said that Pastor Warner gave him a ride once to church and said, after that, you're on your own. You get here on your own power. So, so I guess that's why he got the 10-speed bike. But anyway, he drives all the way across town riding his bike in the Tucson summer heat to come and tell me about Jesus. So I quickly threw him out of the house, told him he could keep his religion to himself. But he came back again. And again, I was not so responsive. I had been raised a Mormon, and I had been involved in transcendental meditation. So I'm convinced I had at least 2 demons that were not at all impressed with his Christianity. But he planted a seed, and from that point on, I knew that I was missing something. There was something lacking in my life, and it actually grew in intensity over time. So I was working in a band with some of the people that got saved, Richard Kirkpatrick, and Richard quit the band because he got saved, and I mocked him. We went to high school. It was our senior year of high school, and so I would mock him. Yeah, next week you're going to be serving the devil, but he kept his testimony, and I could see something genuine and real. And so, my life continued to fall apart and be empty. And even though we were getting closer to, quote unquote, making it, we had some pretty good connections with the music group. And, we would get backstage passes to a lot of the big concerts and stuff like that. But I remember one particular concert. We were in Phoenix at Sun Devil Stadium, and it was an all-day type concert. And 10 years after was the final act, and I had taken a girl with me to that concert, and she was flirting with other guys, so I got really ticked off. I said, "You get your own ride home," and we had backstage passes, so I was backstage.
Whoa. Cold.
Rock and roll lifestyle right here, man. That's rock and roll.
Yeah.
So I was
sex, love, and rock and roll.
That was it. So I was backstage, and there's free alcohol, and I'm just drinking. And the concert finishes, and Alvin Lee, he's they say the fastest guitarist in the world. He finishes, and he walks off the stage, and he's got 2 groupies, and and he walks by me, and I'm drinking. I look at him, and I just see emptiness. And it was like that was a dawning moment that I was on a path leading to nowhere. And so it wasn't long after that I met Richard, and I had been talking to my cousin, and he told me about evangelists. And so I saw Richard. I said, "Hey, do you got any evangelists?" Richard said, well, we do, but not right now. You can come to a concert. And I said, I hear music all the time. But another friend, Bob Marker, invited me to come out to the church. It would have been January 2nd. He actually invited me out on New Year's Eve, but I told him there's no way I'm going to church on New Year's Eve. So we went out partying and went to a club, and I just walked out of the club that New Year's Eve, and I remember being so empty. You know, everyone was congratulating Happy New Year, but I was so miserable. I actually was in tears, and I looked up to the sky. I didn't know if I believed in God at that point, but I said, if you're real, you know, I need something. So I went to a music scene Friday, January 2nd, 1976. And, you know, there was, I think there was a group from Prescott playing, but there was one girl who testified about how, even though she was such a mess, that she knew that God loved her. And I remember just listening to that, and it just dawned on me, I really need Jesus. So I prayed right there, even before they gave an altar call. And but they did give an altar call, and I responded to it. And it was Gary praying with me, and Kevin Kevin was praying as well, Kevin Greer. And so he told me, he said, so if you're going to live for God, you need to quit smoking, drinking, sex. He just laid down the riot.
So more rock and roll lifestyle.
So he said, "You have any cigarettes?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, just give them to me." So I took them out of my pocket. He said, "Yeah, you go get rid of your alcohol, pour it down the drain." And, I was naive enough just to do it. So that night I stopped drinking, smoking, everything, and haven't started since. So that was my story. And Mary, on the other hand, she was a little higher class than I was. She was the governor's secretary here in Tucson, the Tucson branch, and so she was kind of hobnobbing with the better clientele, or class of people. And
definitely more sophisticated.
Yeah, definitely. She came from Douglas. I was, you asked what high school, I went to Sunnyside, and she was in Douglas, and she was a cheerleader, and I actually probably, when I was working at the Roundup, I probably served her as a busboy when their football team came to town. So we probably had an encounter, but nothing materialized out of that. But we ended up playing in Oil of Joy, the same band, and she got saved, which really I should tell her story. Her sister was saved in the Flagstaff church and told her she needs to go to church. And so she did once, but she was afraid to respond because she thought maybe people might think she was a sinner if she answered the altar call. So she didn't. But this is interesting. On Tucson Bible Conference, this would have been November of 1979. It was happened to be the Veterans Day holiday, and so she was driving back from Douglas to Tucson. She lived here, and she missed her turn, and she ended up driving down to 6th Avenue, and she remembered the church, so she got out. She drove by, and she was thinking, Monday night, there's something going on. There's a lot of people here. So she actually parked, went in, and that night got saved.
Praise God. And I some of those things I've never heard, but the persistence of God's love and His pursuit of you and I is nothing short of incredible.
Amen.
That even when we mock, even when we reject and put it off, He's still reaching out to us. And so I know I mentioned friendly banter, Canadians and Americans, but it is actually germane to our discussion that there is a kind of healthy respect and rivalry that exists between our two nations, and This is a part of, let me introduce you, let me bring you up to speed, is we share the same language, except most Americans wouldn't know what a loony or a toonie is. We share an outwardly similar culture. We are two of the largest countries in the world that are friendly neighbor states with one of the longest shared borders in the world. And so these, there are a lot of countries with that kind of boundary. You find all kinds of skirmishes and intrusions and conflicts, and so our relationship, our two nations, is very, very unique.
Even with this, I mean, there's a great deal of ignorance about Canada amongst Americans, and Canada, it's not your fault. But is there anything that stands out to you kind of here? I mean, I think we think that Canada is the 51st state, but is there anything that you would like to expunge for your fellow Americans as far as ignorance? Is there anything you'd like to enlighten us about Canada, or one of your favorite tropes that you want to dismount?
I think that was my opinion. Canada was kind of the 51st state. They had the Toronto Blue Jays, so they had that was kind of what, my only reference point before God called me specifically to Canada. And so I didn't really realize the difference. But when you get there and you live there, you understand that they are two different nations and two different personalities. And thankfully, they work together wonderfully, and that's been a wonderful union, and that has served both countries over, history. What is interesting, though, and I'm not sure if anyone would know this, in 1776, when the American Revolution broke out, and the Canadians chose to remain loyal to the British, and so the Americans were thinking about attacking Canada, but there was a prophecy. You can see this in Peter Marshall's book, The Light and the Glory. It was a prophecy that said, "Leave Canada alone. I have a different purpose for it." And so that resonated amongst the people of that day. And so they kind of left Canada out of the battle. And so Canada chose to remain loyal, and the Americans revolted. And you can still see that same, it's interesting as that plays out over time that, Canadians are more pacifist. They're not rebels. They tend to comply with government regulations, and Americans are much more independent and, stubborn, rebellious. And so it's an interesting personality difference that you see in the two countries.
What would you say would be the Canadian view of the American personality, if we're drawing with really broad brushstrokes?
Well, Pierre Trudeau, who Justin Trudeau's present prime minister, his father, he said that being next to the United States, sharing a border with the United States, is like being in bed with an elephant. And you every little movement affects you. And so I think that's what Canadians feel, is that, everything that happens in the United States, they're very aware of it, whereas most Americans aren't too aware of what's happening in Canada. And because of that, Canadians can view Americans as a bit ignorant, self-centered, focused on themselves, whereas Canadians would take pride as being more open-minded. they really gravitate to things like being UN peacekeepers, and that type of mission is something that's strong with them.
And that's why I asked the question, because we are generally guilty as charged in that area, with the exception of somebody like Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, when he does something totally crazy, totally wacky, that you are far more intimately aware of, but that makes the news, and then people think, what's going on? But that isn't the normal day-to-day Canadian at all.
No, and truthfully, Canadians laugh at him too. He is who he is. Yeah, that's he's an interesting leader. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
He was elected.
He did receive a lot from his father and mother, especially. Yes. So there was some things passed down. So
you probably would be more aware of that just because you were more connected back in the 60s and 70s.
No, in other words, that is very kind of you. What you're basically saying is you are older, and so because you're older, you would have been aware of that, not necessarily connected.
Right.
So I take that in the spirit it was delivered, but it is true. I was more aware of his mother because she had some pretty radical tendencies, and was a very tragic figure in the end.
Now, the long-term friendly alliance with the U.S., Canada, strong allies, we fought in wars together, but the alliance kind of rises and falls on the quality of leadership in Washington or Ottawa. So for the first time in about 3 decades, there's been a study that shows that Canadians have their view of the U.S. is less favorable than favorable for the first time in a long time. And I'm sure that the devil tries to exploit that. I don't know if he tried to exploit it when you first got there as a recently arrived American, but how have you seen that? Have you even felt that, even like in the spiritual realm? Have you felt the spiritual warfare when it comes to, I'm an American in Canada, I'm trying to reach these people? I know it's not, the other side of the world, but has that come into play at all?
Well, I think we were sensitive at first that there was a disdain amongst the common Canadian person to Americans, and we felt that. And it's almost like we would just keep silent about being Americans, because I remember Mary was upset one day, and I said, remember, we're not here for politics, we're here for the gospel, so we need to just bite our tongue, and people say negative things, then they're going to say that, and we just need to move on. But what is happening in Canada, especially the Toronto area, is there is such an influx of people from around the world that now isn't so much felt anymore, because there is so much diversity of different peoples. And so I think that we come up against with just a world mindset more than a Canadian mindset, especially in the Toronto area, especially like where we lived, Brampton. When we first moved there, it was very diverse, lots of white people, lots of multicultural families, and now it's almost solely Indian. So there are signs in India, move to Brampton, and they have in numbers, and so Brampton has exploded in growth, but mostly Indian, and so all of a sudden we're the minority in our own town, and that wasn't the case just 15 years ago.
So over a period of a decade, this whole demographic change in one neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Let's kind of switching gears here, but having like a popular, cool name for your church, like One Love, or I remember in Wichita when we were there, there's a startup called Audacity Church.
Audacity?
Audacity Church, yeah. I don't know what the tie-in was, but they were bold because they're passing out flyers. The only other people I've seen pass out flyers besides us. But the new names for the church, you guys just remodeled, and your new name is Church 180. Is that right?
That's right.
I like it personally, but for the record, tell us what's intended to convey. Like, what was the reasoning behind that?
Well, we had to, because we were incorporating, and we were. It's a long story, but we were formerly under the church in North Bay, and so they actually closed down, and we were kind of operating under an umbrella that no longer existed. And so our lawyer said, you should just, in incorporating, choose a different name. So we did do that, and I was, I know that 180 is a thought that we've used in our fellowship about Jesus changing and giving you a new direction. So that was a thought behind that, is that this is where Jesus changes people's lives. And so it's been catchy. I think it's been a good name change for us. But, then some of the people that are more traditional as far as religious, and a lot of people that come to the Toronto area from the Caribbean and Africa, they would find it a bit strange. So it's been good and not so good, but I think it's something that resonates with the younger generation for sure.
Yeah. So let's get a little more personal than just the church, and let's talk for a bit. I think it would be very, very helpful. Let's talk about Mike and Mary Webb and their calling to and their burden for the nation of Canada. Now, you've been there how many years now?
32.
32. Mercy. So I'm sure in the beginning you didn't intend on a 32-year ministry endeavor in another nation, but here you are, you're ministering in Salt Lake City, Utah at the time.
Actually, we had moved to Clifton when we responded to Canada.
And so then you're in Clifton, and so how did the calling to the burden for Canada come about? Walk us through and relate a little bit about that process.
Okay. Going to Conference Tucson and Prescott, for both Mary and I, we were coming in. At that time, there was strong preaching on we need to go to all the world and surrender to the call. And so we both felt that, and it was like it was ripping our heart out. And we said, okay, Lord, here am I, send us. We're willing to go wherever. And so it was May conference of 1985 on a Thursday night. I'm sitting there not thinking about going anywhere. And it's like God said very loud and clear to me, Canada. And I'm like, Canada? So the speaker that night, he came to me privately. He said, I have a word for you, but I didn't want to give it publicly, and that is, you're not presently where you need to be. God has a different place for you. And I told him, I said, wow, I just felt Canada tonight. And he said, well, that's the Lord. So I told Mary, I said, Mary, I felt that God wants us to go to Canada. And she's like, I didn't hear anything. God didn't speak to me. So the Prescott conference in July, 2 months later, I said, well, let's just put it before God and see if he confirms it. So we went to Prescott Monday night. That's when the church was on Ruth Street, and we got there a little bit late, so we were in the video overflow room. And the speaker that night who got up to speak said, just before I preached tonight, I have to say something. There's a couple, you're in the video overflow room. You came to this conference asking for confirmation. I'm giving you that confirmation right now. And so I looked over at Mary, and her mouth was open, and she knew that God was confirming it. So anyway, we made ourselves available to Pastor Warner, and he said, what about Canada? And we were like, yeah, what about Canada? I guess that's where God wants us. We had never been to Canada. We answered the call to go. We had never gone there, but just felt like God made it clear that he wanted us in Canada. But what is fascinating, once I got there, I was there about 3 years, and my mother told me, she said, or my aunt told me, she said, "You know, Mike, your grandfather was Canadian." And I'm like, "No, I didn't know that." And she said, "Yeah, he was born in Ontario." And looked it up. Sure enough, he was born about 2 hours from where we live. And then I just found out really this year that on my dad's mother's side, her grandparents immigrated from England to Canada in 1833 into Toronto. They came into Toronto. And so here I have this Canadian heritage that I'm totally unaware of, and have relatives from Nova Scotia, Canada. And so I could see that there was a master plan, even though I didn't have any idea that God was somehow connecting me with my roots.
So have you been on Ancestry.com? Or, this is all just coming, because it is fascinating that after all this time, there are these little confirmations.
Yeah, there definitely was a master plan, but I had no idea. Yeah. But FamilySearch.org, some relatives pointed me to that. And so I have letters written by my great-great-grandparents saying about, they were Methodists, they came to Canada, and Orson Pratt, who was one of Joseph Smith's right-hand men, came to Canada and shared the Mormon gospel with them, and they moved. And actually, great-great-grandmother was best friends with Joseph Smith and Emma Smith, his first wife. So I had no idea.
So that explains being sent to Salt Lake, right?
Yeah, that's
it.
I went to Salt Lake to win Mormons to Jesus. We got some mix.
Well, that is, it really is encouraging. And I've got to say that isn't just verbiage, that you are the longest standing missionary in our fellowship. I don't know anyone else that has been in another nation for 32 years. More and more, it's kind of like, let's do our 5 years and get our 5-year certificate and then be able to move on to other things. So I greatly admire you and Mary in this area. So your church is actually in Mississauga, right?
Yeah. Right next to the airport.
And so tell us briefly, where is Mississauga, especially in connection with the GTA, the Greater Toronto area?
So Mississauga would be just west of Toronto. It would be considered a suburb, but part of the general Toronto area, GTA. And so it's suburbs. The Toronto area is a huge area. It's in population equivalent to the Chicago area. So it's lots of communities around there. And
I didn't ask that just to fill time. I had a real purpose, because when you talk about Toronto, having been there and trying to be a man with understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, you're talking about truly about a metropolitan city, not just in the sense of numbers. You're talking about the center of a great population. It is Toronto is the epicenter, both economically, culturally and socially, at least eastern Canada. You have Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta that are more rural, but it is one of the most metropolitan cities that I've personally ever been to. And as a result, they're real distinctive. So is there any distinctive about Toronto that stands out that you want to give emphasis to here?
Well, it's an exciting city. It's a forward-looking, progressive city that is a happening place. It's a place that people like to come to. One of the things that people say to me after they visit our area is they say it's so clean. So sometimes they call Toronto the Little Apple, and they compare it to Toronto or New York City, the Big Apple. And so I think Toronto has a lot of the appeal of a big city like New York without a lot of the crime, without a lot of the, just a lot of the bad things that happen in a big city. So it's a very popular place for people to come, and people are lining up to come from all over the world.
One of the advantages of living in a metropolis is the church planting opportunities. I believe Toronto is like the fourth largest metro area in North America. But what have you seen as far as planting guys out of the GTA, out of that culture? Like, what kind of quality of men have come out of that area? I mean, I know a lot of them. I know a lot of them since they got saved. But just the quality of men and how many church plants have come out of Mississauga, just reaching young men in that area.
Right. Well, and we have had, that's one of the unusual graces, I think, that have marked our time in Canada, as God has given us just a quality of men that have responded, and very good men, and that feel called to preach or willing to go. So we have 7 churches in the Toronto area, and then there's one in Ottawa and one in Montreal, and many other men that are still wanting to go and preach. I've had about 5 men speak to me about international work, and that's kind of where we want to go as a congregation, is to start planning churches internationally, and we're believing for that. But what is interesting is that every church is different. So you could take our North York Church, and it's very, just in the area it's in, it's a very black church, mostly black. But then you go a little farther to Scarborough, and you have Pastor Clyde's church, and it's a lot of Filipinos, Asians. And then a little farther to Ajax, and a very diverse church there. And so all of the churches are different. None of them are the same, but they all are doing well right now. We're very blessed to, have them all growing and just good things happening. So we're excited about the area and the possibilities for the future.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is that there's been genuine growth and more so development among the pastors themselves and the congregation, and your possibilities really are unlimited. And so I'm glad these men they're all their own men. They have the same spirit, the same vision, but they are their own men, and the gospel is reflected in that way through each of them. So let me just briefly, this is a kind of a humorous aside, circle back and revisit the healthy rivalries between our two countries, some of the common Canadianisms. The big one, and I've been saying this since I was 6 years old, Mike, which is A. To, A is, it's hard to, it's like, there's certain words in Spanish they use like this, but A is not a question. It's not a statement. It is all to itself. And so people will ask, I think we were talking pre-filming, they'll ask if you've had your Timmy today, referring to Tim Hortons, and preferably a double-double. I guess it's so bad they need double cream and double sugar and some Timbits as well. I know, and just very briefly for everyone listening, that there is really a big picture story at work in here. It's interesting as we're talking, we're looking at seeds of the kingdom. The Larry going to Vancouver, the church in North Bay, Dave Marks and that connection, Glenn Ruption and the open door in Russia. And so the Tucson, and this isn't to blow our own whistle or horn, some of it is to get the story right and understand that it's far bigger than any one of us, but that connection between Tucson, Canada, and Russia is very real. And, we move forward by vision, but we understand by looking back. And so looking back, I was even surprised and I was even amazed at the connection that exists. And so before we wrap everything up, Mike, I wanted to ask you a number of things about world evangelism there in Canada. And God's done an amazing work. And for our Canadian brethren listening, let me say that personally, as a pastor, every conference I look forward and am immensely blessed by the Canadians, whether Western or Eastern Canada, that come to conference every year. I love everyone. I love to see the English, the Namibians, the Georgians, but there's something special about the Canadians that are there. But in the context of Canadian culture and making disciples, and I've recognized there is a real quality of men and women that have come out of the six, no question. But I had a couple of areas, and number one was the area of challenges. What kind of challenges did you run into and face? And some of these are ingrained culturally, but they affected and they were challenges to be overcome in the area of making disciples, especially in the beginning and maybe still today.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is just that you're dealing with different cultures, different mindsets, people that don't think like Americans think, like I think, and learning to, connect with them and speak into their lives. That is a challenge. It's something that's always changing. And so we've reached various different groups. Just this last year we have coming in someone from Syria, someone from Brazil, and these are mindsets that you're trying to work with people that don't process life like Americans. And I think that's one of the challenges is trying to relate, trying to get them to see what is inside of us as a fellowship, where they can tap into me personally. So that's just a challenge. And sometimes there can be misunderstandings and a lack of clarity that makes it challenging. And so, it's something we have to work at and continue to work at and adjust and try to be effective in communicating one-on-one personally in a discipleship way.
Yeah. The other area I wrote down was surprises. And so are there things over the years that have really surprised you about doing ministry in Canada? Yes, there are challenges. It's different, maybe difficult, but in the end, these are some really delightful things that have really been a surprise to you.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I have a loving wife who's remained faithful to me over these years and all the challenges that we face. So, amen. I'm not sure I've deserved such a wonderful spouse. So that I'm blessed by that. But I think surprising is that God supernaturally has shown His grace to us in providing for us and meeting our financial needs. Toronto, very expensive place. I shared some of this at the Prescott conference, but how God really has helped us and provided for us and helped us to survive and be blessed financially. And I can look back and I can just see a string of supernatural graces and helps along the way that God has been there to provide our need and take care of us and cause us to be blessed. We're very blessed. I have to rejoice. I have the greatest daughters, grandchildren. They're all, I don't think I would have what I have if we hadn't responded to the call and obeyed to go. The tight-knitness of our family, the closeness, there is blessing in going. And that is not something that I expected or knew would happen, but it's been a surprising joy along the journey.
Mm. And then the third word I wrote down had to do with expectations, which is based on your time there, 32 years. Most guys would be planning their retirement, and you're planning on, how do we power ahead? But based on the things you've seen that God can do, are there specific expectations that you're bringing with you into 2021?
Yes, there is, especially when it comes to international church planting. I really feel it's come to that time for us to move into that dimension. And how that happens, I'm not sure. Our theme for this year is open windows in heaven, open doors on earth. And so we're believing God to open the windows of heaven and help us to have some open doors here on earth. And so church planting we have lots of good men that I feel like we can continue to plant churches. And so I want to press ahead into that. It's almost like the time is short. We need to make full use of our time. We need to accelerate, if anything, what's happening. And so that's the need. I feel like we won't have forever to do what we're doing, so we need to do it now.
So, Pastor Mike, you have baby churches in different parts of the large metropolitan area. What about vision? Like, based on the challenges, the surprises, the expectations Pastor Warner just talked about, anything specific as far as vision is related moving into 2021? And if so, why? Like, what triggered that?
Our vision is to be a center of evangelism into regions beyond. If you look at our vision statement, but that's. I think that's really where our burden is to move beyond our present territory and expand. And there is an interesting a couple of things I just bring out. One is that Canada has a rich heritage of world impact when it comes to the gospel. A.B. Simpson, R.A. Jaffrey, Amy Semple McPherson, A.W. Tozier. We could talk about a lot of people that God has used Canadians to make significant impact. And I feel like that lies ahead for us, that we could enter into that realm and that dimension. The other thing is, I mentioned the 1776 prophecy, but it said that God had a special plan for Canada in the end times. And
wow.
That's what I feel Dr. Yonggi Cho, when he went to Canada first in 1974, he prophesied. He said God's going to do something significant from Canada in the end times. So that's just, I feel like that's something that God has for us, and how to enter into that, how to position ourselves so that we can see that potential fulfilled is on our hearts. Yeah. I want to see more. That's really where I'm at. I'm happy in what God has done, but I'm not happy as far as I feel like there's so much more that God has ahead. And I just want to say that, because of Pastor Warner's vision and burden, we have what we have in Canada. That none of that would be there if it wasn't for Pastor Warner and his vision and burden. So it's pretty incredible when you think about Tucson, Arizona affecting Canada. But God has done that, and it wouldn't have happened apart from your heart and your vision. And so we greatly appreciate you.
And I've got to say, I could just be weird, and some would say amen to that. But when I hear "Oh Canada," and full disclosure, it is at ice hockey games generally, there's something in me that is moved. And I've never understood that there's something that's been moved. And so I don't know if there is such a thing in Canada as Pastor Appreciation Month, but we certainly appreciate you and your wife, your labors, the labors of your workers, the baby churches I mentioned, always looking forward to seeing the Canadian contingent in our Bible conferences. And I really think, to wrap this up, the beauty of the gospel is seen in that it can create a platform for patriotism without the aberration of nationalism, because patriotism and nationalism are two different things. You can be patriotic, and so back to the anthem, true patriot love. And so a patriot is someone who loves their country, wants to see revival, but at the same time, it's real allegiance. First allegiance is to heaven, and just hearing this confirms to me the fact that you and your wife have played a part in a much bigger scheme, and I'm not a prophet. I didn't prophesy about the election, and so my integrity is still at stake here, and in good standing. But I would say to you that I would definitely hold on to that desire. God, we want to see more, So.
And I know I speak for Pastor Warner and for others when I say that you and Mary have been an amazing blessing to everyone that you've come in contact with in the ministry. I can speak for some people in Salt Lake City who would say that as well.
Yeah.
But the church there in Mississauga, our brothers and sisters there, faithful laborers and soldiers that are just doing what they know how to do, are inspiring not only just people there in the GTA, but all over the world, where you can look at what's happening in Mississauga and say, we can use this as a model for evangelizing huge metropolitan areas in first world situations, where what God is doing in Mississauga can inspire anyone anywhere to do anything. And I think what you guys have done kind of is bigger than maybe your own imagination. And that's true for a lot of us. But I think what's happened in Toronto is special, and we are very proud and happy to know that you guys are our brothers and sisters, fellow laborers. So I've hoped that you've learned or maybe been introduced to our brethren from the north and how things fit together in the grand story. It's not just one huge border or common language or love for donuts, but something that we have in common with our Canadian brothers from Toronto.
Yeah.
Let
me remind you of something. If you want to know where Pastor Mike's church is, whenever you fly into Lester Pearson Airport, you fly right over his church. Because it's right there by the end of, what is that, the south? I'm not sure what's direction runway.
West, yeah.
West, yeah. And so people actually do park there to watch planes fly. I'd say look out your window to see the area where the church is and where we hope God's going to do good things. So, Gabe, sorry for my rudeness in interrupting.
Well, I think being around a Canadian has changed us a little bit, because you just said sorry. Sorry for my rudeness. So it's changing our culture already. But we'd like to thank you for joining us here at Door Church Connect. If you can get us those 5 stars so we can help you and help others, so people can find us. We want to thank Miguel Chavez and Mike Hari Jr. For producing our shows as always. But we will see you again next week, and we want to thank Pastor Mike and Mary Webb for all they've done and for joining us today. All right, have a good one.